It began with the kind of rain that did not simply fall, but attacked from every direction. Heavy sheets that turned the streets of Seattle into rivers of reflection. The sky had lowered itself like a weight upon the city. Thunder echoing across the skyline, lightning cutting quick scars of light across the glass towers. By 9 o'clock at night, most people had already hurried indoors, seeking warmth behind windows fogged with condensation. Only a few souls remained outside, and Maya Thompson was one of them. Maya was 25, her hair plastered to her forehead under the soaked hood of her sweatshirt. She pedaled her battered bike along the slick pavement, the basket strapped to the back, carrying 2 bags of groceries. It was the last order of her long shift for a delivery service that kept her afloat. The weight of student loans and the bills from her mother's clinic appointments left no space for stopping. She told herself that if she just finished this one last drop-off, she could go home, wrap herself in her only thick blanket, and forget about the storm outside. But this delivery was not like the others. Her map app guided her away from the lively neighborhoods and into a quiet street lined with fir trees that leaned against each other in the rain. The road ended at a tall wrought iron gate, behind which stood a house that seemed cut off from the world. The mansion was dark, except for a single warm light burning in an upstairs window, a glow that seemed strangely defiant against the storm. Maya hesitated. This was not the kind of home she usually delivered to. Most customers lived in small apartments or duplexes. Here was something entirely different, a place that carried both wealth and secrecy. She dismounted, wiped rain from her eyelashes, and pressed the buzzer at the gate. For a long moment, nothing happened. The rain pounded her shoulders, sliding down her spine until she shivered. She wondered if the order had been a mistake. Then slowly the gate creaked open. Her shoes splashed on the long stone path as she walked toward the porch. The house loomed over her, its windows like silent eyes. She balanced the grocery bags in her hands, fighting the urge to turn and leave. At last she reached the door and knocked. The handle turned with a click. The door opened, and there he was. The man standing before her looked younger than she expected. He was tall, 32 at most, with dark hair falling in careless strands over his forehead. He wore a white shirt that was wrinkled as if he had pulled it on without much thought, the top buttons undone. His eyes, though, were what held her. They were the kind of eyes that had once seen too much brightness and then retreated into shadows. Tired, haunted, yet startlingly direct. Rain spilled sideways through the open doorway, flecking his shirt, but he did not seem to notice. He simply stood there watching her as if he had been waiting for this exact knock. Maya cleared her throat. She lifted the bags slightly. "Here are your groceries." Her voice cracked from the cold. He did not reach for them. His gaze swept over her soaked jacket, her trembling hands, the strands of hair dripping across her cheek. For a moment she thought he might close the door and retreat into whatever silence he lived in. Instead, he spoke. His voice was low, rough, almost unfamiliar with use. "You are soaked. Do not go back out there. Stay. I will keep you warm." The words were not said with arrogance or command. They carried a weight that was softer, almost desperate, as if he had been starved for company and could not bear to let her vanish into the storm. Maya blinked at him, stunned. She had delivered hundreds of orders, exchanged countless brief thank yous through cracked doors, but never had a customer asked her to step inside, much less to stay. She felt the cold rain beating against her back and the uncertain warmth spilling from his hallway. Logic told her to decline. Every instinct of caution told her to walk away. And yet, something in his voice, something raw and unpolished, held her frozen on the threshold. Who was he, this solitary man in a mansion lit by only one lamp? Why would a millionaire with the world at his fingertips look at a delivery girl as if she were the answer to a loneliness he could not escape? Why on this night of relentless rain did he ask her to stay? Maya hesitated on the threshold, water dripping from her sleeves and pooling on the marble step beneath her feet. The man's request echoed in her ears with a strange persistence, soft yet impossible to ignore. She had spent the last 3 years delivering to strangers across the city, and never once had she stepped inside. Protocol was clear: deliver, confirm on the app leave. No exceptions. But the storm behind her roared with the weight of 1,000 warnings, and the look in his eyes was unlike any she had ever encountered. It was not hunger or danger, but something lonelier, something that asked not for obedience but for understanding. Slowly she crossed the line into his home. The door closed with a muffled thud that silenced the storm outside. She glanced around, clutching the grocery bags like a shield. The entryway was vast with high ceilings and a chandelier that hung dark unlit, its crystals dull without light. Only a single lamp glowed from a table against the wall, throwing soft amber across the hardwood floor. The house smelled faintly of cedar and rain, a scent that felt clean but also empty. Ethan set the groceries down on a side table without looking at them. He reached for a folded towel resting on a nearby chair and handed it to her. The gesture was kind but clumsy, as though he was out of practice with the mechanics of care. She muttered a thank you and began drying her hair, her eyes never leaving his form. He moved slowly, deliberately, his shoulders tense, as though hosting a guest was an unfamiliar task. She studied the space around her. Though the house was clearly expensive with polished railings and antique details, it felt abandoned. Dust lingered on the corners of picture frames, and several rooms lay in darkness, their doors half closed. A grand piano stood against one wall, its lid shut a fine film across its surface, as though it had not been touched in months. No photographs, no laughter, no signs of life, except the man before her. Maya felt her chest tighten. She should not be here. A stranger's mansion, a storm raging outside, and a man whose wealth could buy him anything yet who lived in shadows. She forced herself to ask the question that had been circling in her mind. Do you often invite delivery girls into your home? Her tone was sharper than intended, meant to mask the unease she felt. Ethan's lips twitched into something that might have been the beginning of a smile, but faded too quickly. No, he answered simply, "You are the first." That did not comfort her. If anything, it raised her guard higher. She gripped the towel tighter, aware of the silence pressing between them. He seemed to notice her caution. "You are safe here," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I just thought you looked so cold." The honesty in his voice unsettled her. She had met all kinds of people on her routes, some rude, some indifferent, a few kind. But no one had ever spoken with such raw gentleness, as if her shivering mattered in a way no one else had ever acknowledged. He gestured toward the kitchen. "Would you like tea?" The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he rarely spoke. She considered refusing. Yet the storm outside cracked again, with violent thunder shaking the windows. She found herself nodding. Tea would be good. He disappeared briefly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous house. Maya remained in the entry, shifting from foot to foot. Her instinct still screamed caution, yet curiosity had begun to weave threads through her fear. Who is this man who lived in grandeur, yet wore grief like a second skin? Her eyes traced the staircase, the unlit chandelier, the piano covered in dust. The wealth was undeniable, but the warmth was missing. It was a house that looked alive from the outside, but hollow within. Ethan returned with 2 mugs steam curling from the ceramic. His hands were steady as he offered one to her. She wrapped her chilled fingers around the heat, grateful despite herself. He took a sip from his own and leaned against the wall, watching her with a guarded expression. "You did not have to let me in," she said, finally breaking the silence. He shrugged. "You did not have to stay." The exchange hung in the air, simple but heavy. She wondered again about his motives. Was he dangerous or just unbearably lonely? His voice softened further. "I am sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I did not mean. It is just quiet here most nights." The storm made it worse. Something about his admission rang true, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe he was not a threat, but a man drowning in his own silence. She studied him over the rim of her cup. His shirt clung damp against his collarbone, his hair tousled, as if he had run his hands through it too many times. He was young for someone so withdrawn. 32 maybe. A man who should have been out with friends or in the glow of city lights. Yet he had chosen seclusion. Maya felt the smallest flicker of empathy. She knew what it was to carry burdens unseen. She also knew how it felt when no one noticed. The tea was warm, but the questions in her mind burned hotter. Why was he here alone in this house? Why did his smile seem both genuine and haunted? She told herself she would leave as soon as the rain eased. Yet some part of her already sensed that tonight had shifted something. The groceries on the side table sat forgotten, while the storm outside continued its furious rhythm. Inside, 2 strangers shared silence that was beginning to feel less like danger and more like the fragile beginning of an understanding. The rain did not let up, and neither did the silence between them. Maya sipped her tea, slowly aware of how strange this moment was. She was inside the house of a man she had only just met, a man whose name she did not yet know, surrounded by wealth that felt abandoned rather than lived in. He leaned against the wall across from her eyes, lowered as though weighing the wisdom of speaking at all. Finally, he asked in a voice rough with disuse, "What is your name?" She hesitated before answering Maya. "And you?" "Ethan," he said, after a pause, long enough to make her wonder if he had considered lying. She nodded once, filing the name away, tasting it silently. Ethan. It fit the solemn air of the house, fit the loneliness she sensed in him. He gestured toward the towel she still held. "I am sorry I did not have anything better." She shook her head. "It is fine, better than nothing." The smallest smile brushed his lips and then was gone. The storm cracked outside again, rattling the windows, and she flinched. He noticed tilting his head. "Long night." "You could say that," she replied. "I have been delivering since noon. This is my last order." He raised an eyebrow. "You work for one of those services." "Instacart, Uber, whichever one is paying this week," she answered dryly. "It pays the bills." Her tone carried resignation, and his gaze sharpened slightly. as if he heard more than she intended. For a moment, he looked like he might ask about those bills, about why she was out here in such weather. But instead he said quietly, "That must be exhausting." She shrugged, unwilling to let pity touch her. "It is just a job, better than some others I have had." Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then his expression shifted, thoughtful, almost searching. "Have we met before?" The question caught her off guard. She frowned. "I do not think so. I grew up around here, but moved away for a while." His eyes flickered as if pulling up an old photograph. "You used to ride a red bike down this street. A little girl, maybe 10 hair, flying behind her. You crashed into the hedge outside that gate once." Maya blinked, startled. She remembered. The sting of scraped knees, the embarrassment of a mailbox dented by her clumsy fall. "That was me," she admitted softly. "I cannot believe you remember that." His gaze warmed for the briefest instant, a flash of something human behind the walls. "I remember because you laughed even while bleeding. You did not cry." Maya let out a surprised breath, half a laugh. "My dad told me crying would not fix anything, so I decided to pretend I was tougher than I felt." The room eased with the memory. For the first time, she saw Ethan not as a stranger, but as a witness to a fragment of her childhood. It unsettled her in ways she could not explain. They were not entirely strangers after all. She sipped her tea again, letting the warmth slide down her throat. The air between them shifted. The suspicion that had stiffened her spine began to soften, though not disappear. She was still cautious, still aware of the strangeness of the situation, but something about the recognition threaded familiarity through the unease. Ethan glanced toward the forgotten groceries on the table. "I suppose I should put those away." He rose, carrying the bags into the kitchen. She followed reluctantly, unwilling to stand alone in the vast entryway. The kitchen was large and modern, though it too bore the marks of disuse. A single pan sat on the stove, clean but untouched. The refrigerator hummed softly as he placed the items inside, with a precision that suggested he had been living off the same small set of habits for a long time. "You live here alone?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Yes. The word was clipped final. She considered pushing, but let it rest. His solitude was obvious in every corner. Instead, she asked, "Do you always order groceries yourself? No assistant, no staff. No, I prefer it this way." He shut the fridge door gently. "Too many people make noise." Maya raised her brows. "Most people would welcome help." He shrugged. "Noise is not always company." The statement lingered. She leaned against the counter, feeling the chill in her clothes slowly recede under the heat of the tea. "Why did you leave the light on upstairs?" she asked, curious. It was the only window lit in the house. Ethan looked at her steadily. "Because if you turn off every light, the darkness feels permanent." She swallowed, struck by the quiet confession. He did not elaborate, and she did not press, but the sentence lodged in her chest. The storm began to settle, outside rain, softening to a steady rhythm instead of a pounding torrent. She glanced toward the front door, her sense of duty returning. "I should go," she said more to herself than to him. He did not argue, though something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment quickly masked. "Thank you for staying long enough to warm up." She set the empty mug on the counter, tugged her hood back over her damp hair, and nodded. "Thank you for the tea, for the towel." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture formal in its restraint. As she walked toward the door, he followed, but kept a distance, as though afraid to reveal He wanted her to stay longer. At the threshold, she paused the storm, a softer curtain now. He leaned against the frame, watching her again, with that unreadable expression. "Drive safe," he said. She lifted her bike from where it leaned against the porch. The words felt strange in her ears, as though this man had not spoken them in years. She mounted the bike, ready to leave, yet something in her chest resisted. As she rode down the path, she could not help glancing back. He was still there, silhouetted in the doorway, the single lamp behind him, painting him in gold against the darkness. For reasons she did not understand, the sight stayed with her long after. The house disappeared into the rain. The following days blurred together in the rhythm of deliveries and damp nights. Yet Maya found her thoughts circling back to that mansion more often than she wanted. She told herself it was nothing more than curiosity, the same curiosity that made her wonder about the lives of strangers, whose doors she knocked on every day, but deep down she knew it was different. There had been something in Ethan's eyes that refused to fade from memory. One evening after another long shift, her route brought her near that neighborhood again. She slowed her bike heart, tapping faster, as she recognized the iron gate in the distance. She had no delivery scheduled there yet. Her hands tightened on the handlebars and guided her forward anyway. The mansion loomed as silent as before, its windows dark, except for the same upstairs light. She dismounted, standing at the gate, arguing silently with herself. She had no reason to be here, and yet part of her longed to see if he would open the door again, if that strange mix of loneliness and gentleness was real or imagined. Before she could turn away, the gate opened with its familiar groan. He must have seen her from a camera, she realized, because when she walked the stone path, he was already waiting at the door. This time he looked less startled and more prepared, as though he had been expecting her return eventually. She lifted a hand in awkward greeting. "I was passing by. I thought I would check if you needed more groceries." The corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "No groceries tonight, only company." The words made her flush with equal parts wariness and warmth. Still, she stepped inside, shaking rain from her jacket. The house looked the same, but felt different now that she entered without an official purpose. He led her toward the living room, where a fire had been lit in the hearth, its flames painting the walls in amber light. The transformation surprised her. The shadows were softer here, the silence warmer. He poured 2 glasses of water instead of tea and settled opposite her. She studied him in the flicker of firelight, seeing details she had missed before. His hands were steady, yet bore faint scars across the knuckles. His jaw was sharp, but carried a tension that never quite left. And his smile, when it appeared, was fleeting like a ghost passing through. "Why do you live here alone?" she asked finally, unable to contain the question. He exhaled slowly. "Because it is easier than explaining." Explaining what? He swirled the water in his glass, staring into it, as though it might hold the past. "I lost something I could not replace." The words hung heavy in the air, more confession than conversation. She frowned gently. "What was it?" He shook his head, eyes glinting with pain. "Not what? Who?" His voice cracked on the single syllable, and Maya felt the weight of his grief press into the room. He leaned back, gaze fixed on the flames. "She was my fiancée. We were supposed to be married last spring." The air caught in Maya's lungs. She waited, sensing the fragility of his words. "There was an accident, a car. She did not make it. I did, but sometimes I wish I had not." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "That is why I left everything. The company, the people, the noise. None of it mattered anymore." Maya's chest ached. She had expected mystery, perhaps scandal, but not this raw wound disguised as solitude. She wanted to speak, to offer some kind of comfort, but every phrase felt inadequate. Instead, she let silence stretch a silence that said she was listening without judgment. Ethan glanced at her, finally eyes shimmering with something unshed. "You remind me of her in small ways. Not your face, not your voice, but the way you looked at me that night, as if I was still here, as if I had not already disappeared with her." His confession startled her, and yet it carried no hint of romantic substitution, only the truth of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Maya swallowed, unsure how to respond. "I am sorry," she said softly. He nodded, accepting the words without anger. "People always say that, but you said nothing that night. You just stood there shivering, but you stayed. It felt different." She met his gaze across the flicker of the fire. "Maybe because I know what it is like when people stop noticing." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, not ready to share her own scars. "Another time." He did not press, perhaps recognizing the boundary. Instead, he shifted the subject with a quiet sigh. "Do you believe people can heal?" Maya thought of her mother's fragile health, of the betrayal that had left her scrambling to pay debts alone, of the nights she wanted to give up but could not. "I think healing is not about forgetting," she said at last. "It is about finding something worth staying for." Ethan's lips curved faintly, the first real smile she had seen from him. "And what makes something worth staying for?" She did not answer, but the question lingered in both their minds. The storm outside calmed to a drizzle, yet neither of them moved toward the door. Hours slipped by as the fire dwindled. They spoke of trivial things, books they had read, places in the city that had changed the sound of rain on different rooftops. Each subject was simple, yet beneath every word hummed the deeper truth of two lives carrying unspoken weight. When Maya finally rose to leave, Ethan did not try to stop her, but his eyes followed her every step as though memorizing the moment. At the threshold, he said quietly, "Thank you for listening." She turned back, meeting his gaze. "Sometimes that is all a person needs." He held her eyes one heartbeat longer before she stepped into the misty night. As she rode away, she realized she had learned more than his name. She had learned the reason behind the haunted smile, and though it frightened her, it also drew her closer. 3 days passed before Maya saw the mansion again, and this time it was not by accident. She had told herself she was only following the route that the delivery app gave her, that the algorithm had chosen the address, not her curiosity, but when she glanced at the screen and saw the familiar street name, her pulse quickened in a way that betrayed her denial. She pedaled through the drizzle of another gray evening, the city lights blurred by wet pavement, until the iron gate appeared through the trees. Before she could even dismount her bike, the gate opened as though triggered by her presence alone. A ripple of unease passed through her, followed quickly by something warmer, something like anticipation. Ethan was waiting at the door when she reached the porch. He wore a navy sweater this time, his hair damp as if he had stepped out into the rain moments earlier. The look on his face was not surprise, but quiet recognition, as though he had known she would return eventually. "You again," he said, his voice low but steadier than before. Maya held up the bag of groceries, another order apparently. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before softening. Or maybe it is fate. She rolled her eyes lightly to mask her nerves. I think it is just the app. He stepped aside to let her in the warmth of the house, wrapping around her shoulders as she crossed the threshold. The entryway felt less daunting this time, though the same lamp cast its lonely amber glow. Ethan gestured toward the living room. "Stay a while. It is raining harder than it looks." She considered protesting, but the sound of the storm outside was convincing, so she followed him. A fire was already lit in the hearth, crackling gently. On a small table near the sofa sat an old record player, a vinyl spinning slowly. From the speakers drifted the soft notes of a jazz trumpet, mellow and haunting. Maya froze slightly at the unexpected beauty of the sound. "You like jazz?" she asked. Ethan poured her a cup of tea from a pot waiting on the tray. "It fills the silence," he replied simply. She took the cup, feeling the heat seep into her fingers. "Silence can be good," she said. "Not always." He settled into the chair across from her. Harvey, the golden retriever, padding into the room. The dog sniffed the air once, then walked straight to Maya and curled against her feet as though they had known each other for years. Maya bent down, stroking his head in surprise. "He likes you." Ethan observed a trace of wonder in his tone. "He does not usually warm up to people this quickly." Maya smiled faintly, scratching the dog's ears. "Maybe he knows I am harmless." Ethan's gaze lingered on her, intense enough to make her shift slightly under its weight. They sat in comfortable near silence for several minutes, the jazz weaving between the sound of the fire and the soft breaths of the dog. Eventually, Ethan spoke again. "Why do you keep doing it, delivering in this weather? You could find other work." Maya stared into her tea, debating how much to reveal. "Because I have no choice. The bills will not wait. My mother's medical treatments will not wait." Ethan's expression tightened, as though he recognized the weight of responsibility. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the fire. "I know what it is like to live with no choice." She glanced at him, wanting to ask more, but he added nothing. Instead, he shifted the subject, his voice softer. "Do you believe in second chances?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, not always. Why?" He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw the raw ache of someone who had lost more than most people could imagine. "Because I am not sure if I deserve one." The confession sat heavy between them, and Maya felt something inside her chest twist. She thought of her own regrets, the mistakes she carried, the people she had trusted who had left her worse off. She swallowed. Maybe it is not about deserving. Maybe it is about needing. He studied her face as if memorizing the words. The record ended the needle clicking softly at the center. Ethan rose to flip it, and for a moment his shoulders slumped, revealing exhaustion that he normally held hidden. When he returned, he asked quietly, "Would you come back even if there were no groceries?" Maya blinked at him, startled. The question was simple, but layered, fragile, yet filled with hope. She looked down at Harvey, who had fallen asleep against her legs, and then back up at the man across from her. "I do not know," she answered honestly. His mouth curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Honest, I respect that." The storm outside showed no sign of letting up, so she stayed longer than she had planned. They talked about small things, the kind that stitch strangers into something closer, favorite books. Childhood foods, the best places in Seattle to watch the sunset. Each answer revealed slivers of who they were, glimpses of the people beneath the burdens. When at last she rose to leave, the rain had softened to a mist. She stepped toward the door, Harvey whining softly in protest. Ethan followed, standing just close enough that she felt the gravity of his presence. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me that silence does not always have to mean emptiness." She met his gaze, caught again by the depth in it, and nodded. "Good night, Ethan. Good night, Maya." She walked into the drizzle, her bike waiting. As she rode away, the thought echoed through her mind with every turn of the pedals. This was no longer an accidental meeting. Something had shifted, and though she did not yet understand it, she knew she would return. The next week unfolded with an odd rhythm, the rain seeming to follow Maya no matter where she went. Each shift dragged her through streets slick with water and wind that cut through her jacket, but beneath the fatigue there was always the quiet awareness of one particular address, resting in the back of her mind. When the app once again delivered her to that iron gate, she did not fight it. This time she entered without hesitation, and the gate opened almost instantly, as if acknowledging a routine. Ethan was waiting in the doorway, Harvey at his side, and the sight of both felt strangely familiar now, like coming to a place that belonged not to her schedule, but to her life. Inside the mansion had begun to change. It was subtle, but she noticed. A second lamp glowed in the hallway. The grand piano in the corner no longer carried dust. A faint aroma of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen as though someone had tried to bake. Ethan offered a sheepish smile when she noticed the smell. "I attempted cookies," he admitted, holding up a plate of uneven circles. Maya laughed for the first time in weeks, the sound surprising her as much as him. "They are not pretty, but they taste better than they look." She tried one and nearly choked her laughter spilling over as she teased him. "Needs work but points for effort." Ethan shook his head, but his eyes warmed in a way she had never seen before. Over the following evenings, their encounters stretched into hours. Sometimes they cooked together, though Maya did most of the guiding, while Ethan stumbled through simple tasks with an awkwardness that revealed how long it had been since he had shared a kitchen. Other times they sat in the living room, watching NBA games on television, while Harvey sprawled across the rug. Ethan confessed he did not understand basketball, but liked the energy of the crowd, and Maya explained plays with an enthusiasm that surprised him. One evening he led her to the piano, running his fingers across the keys with tentative familiarity. "My mother insisted on lessons," he said. "I never appreciated it." "Play something," she urged. His shoulders tensed, but slowly he coaxed a melody from the instrument, the notes hesitant at first, but growing smoother. Maya sat listening, eyes closed, the firelight warming her face. When the final chord faded, she opened her eyes and found him watching her intently, as though her presence was what made the music possible. The moments stitched themselves together into a fabric of quiet companionship. Maya would bring small things when she came, a loaf of bread from a bakery that discounted leftovers, a bouquet of wildflowers she found near the market. Ethan, in turn, began to notice details about her that others overlooked. He remembered how she took her tea without sugar, how she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, how her shoulders relaxed only after Harvey rested his head against her knee. The mansion slowly transformed. Shadows gave way to light as more rooms were opened. More lamps lit more laughter, echoing off high ceilings. Harvey followed Maya from room to room, tail wagging, and Ethan would watch with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. It had been so long since warmth had lived here, and now it seemed to arrive with her. Yet beneath the gentleness there lingered something fragile, a tension that neither spoke aloud. Both carried pasts heavy with loss and betrayal. Both knew how easily comfort could shatter. Still they chose to remain in the fragile present, savoring each small moment. One rainy evening, as they shared leftover pizza at the kitchen counter, Ethan caught himself smiling at nothing, a genuine curve of his lips that startled Maya. What she asked? He shook his head softly. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to eat with. The words struck her more deeply than he intended, and she lowered her gaze to the crust in her hand. She too had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted at a table. Another night, while she dozed on the couch, after a long shift, Ethan draped a blanket over her. He lingered a moment, studying the peaceful lines of her face, the soft rise and fall of her breath. His chest ached with something both new and long buried. He knew he should step back, but the warmth in the room was stronger than the fear of its impermanence. When Maya stirred awake, she found the blanket and whispered thank you, her eyes meeting his with quiet acknowledgement. These evenings did not announce themselves as milestones, yet they became the foundation of something neither dared to name. Small gestures, shared silences, the comfort of presence. Maya found herself looking forward to them more than she admitted, and Ethan found himself counting the hours until the next knock at his door. The mansion was no longer just a monument to loss. With every visit, it became a place where two people scarred, and searching discovered that even in the aftermath of storms there could be warmth, laughter, and the fragile beginnings of healing. The nights of easy laughter and gentle companionship could not last without the shadow of truth pressing closer. It came on an evening when the storm outside was fiercer than usual, the wind howling against the windows, as if determined to remind them that the world beyond still existed. Maya had just finished drying Harvey with a towel after he dashed in from the rain. She was smiling cheeks, flushed from laughter at his playful antics, when she noticed Ethan watching her too intently. The fire cast shadows across his face, carving the lines of strain more sharply than ever. She set the towel aside uneasy. What is it? She asked. Ethan turned toward the flames instead of answering. I should not have let this go on. His voice was raw, breaking the fragile calm. Maya blinked, caught off guard. Let what go on? This, you and me. The dinners, the conversations, the way you make this house feel alive again. He clenched his jaw. I am not supposed to want it. She frowned, confusion twisting into hurt. Not supposed to. Why? Because I already failed once. I had someone I was supposed to protect, someone I promised a future to. She is gone because I was too consumed with my work to notice what mattered. His voice cracked the confession pouring out like the storm outside. I do not deserve another chance. Maya's chest tightened, understanding dawning. This was the wound at his core, the guilt that had hollowed him out. She stepped closer, her voice quiet. Ethan, you cannot punish yourself forever. He shook his head violently. You do not understand. I wake up every night hearing the sound of metal, of shattering glass. I see her face, and then you appear at my door with rain dripping from your hair, and for the first time in months, I feel something other than emptiness. That terrifies me more than the loneliness ever did. Maya's throat closed, her own memories rushing back. She thought of the man she had once trusted, the one who left her burdened with debt and shame, the one who taught her that love could turn cruel. She had built walls to survive, and now here she was, sitting in a mansion, with a man whose grief threatened to drown him and whose kindness threatened to undo her defenses. "You think you are the only one afraid," she whispered. "Do you know what it feels like to give everything you have to someone and watch them walk away when life gets hard? Do you know what it feels like to be left with nothing but bills and silence?" Ethan looked at her sharply, the pain in her voice piercing through his own. "I do," he admitted softer now. "Different circumstances, but yes, I know." Their eyes locked, and in that silence lay the truth they had both avoided. They wanted each other. They needed each other. But they were terrified of repeating the past. Maya stepped back suddenly, the weight of it all crushing her. "I should go." Her words trembled, her body already moving toward the door. Ethan rose instantly, panic flickering across his face. "Maya, wait." She shook her head, pulling on her damp jacket. "If I stay any longer, I will start believing this is real. And what if it is not? What if you change your mind? What if you wake up one day and decide the silence is easier?" Her voice cracked raw with fear. Better to leave now than to break later. She grabbed her bike helmet, her movements frantic. Ethan stood frozen, his hands at his sides as though chained. The storm outside roared louder, the wind rattling the house as though echoing their turmoil. He wanted to reach for her to stop her, but guilt anchored him. Maybe she was right. Maybe he would fail again. Maybe caring for her would only end in another shattered life. Maya opened the door, the rain slamming into her, immediately drenching her within seconds. She stepped onto the porch, turning back once. Ethan's figure stood in the doorway. Shoulders bowed, eyes filled with a torment she could not bear to read. "Goodbye," she whispered, almost lost beneath the storm. Then she was gone, pedaling into the darkness, leaving behind the fragile warmth they had built. Ethan stood at the threshold, long after the fire behind him, flickering low. Harvey whining softly at his side. The mansion felt emptier than it ever had, and for the first time he realized the silence he had once chosen now felt unbearable. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, the storm reduced to a drizzle that clung stubbornly to the air. Ethan had not slept. He had wandered the halls of the mansion until dawn, the echo of Maya's goodbye lodged in his chest like a shard of glass. Every corner of the house reminded him of her. The towel still draped over a chair, the half-eaten pizza box on the counter, the faint imprint of her laughter that seemed to linger in the walls. He poured himself a cup of coffee he did not drink, staring out the window at the endless trees. Harvey whined softly at his side, restless pacing as if sensing his turmoil. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the weight of the emptiness, not as penance, but as suffocation. He had convinced himself he deserved silence, but now silence felt like punishment, too great to bear. By mid-afternoon, he could no longer stay still. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the mist, Harvey barking once, as if to cheer him on. He had no plan except one: he needed to find her. The city pressed in on him as he drove, the traffic and noise jarring after so long in isolation. He had not ventured this far in months. Following a faint memory of her words, he headed toward the small grocery where she had once mentioned working extra hours. When he pushed open the glass door, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the smell of coffee and cardboard boxes filling his nose. Behind the counter, arranging shelves, stood Maya. She froze when she saw him, her eyes widening in shock. Ethan. His name left her lips like an accusation and a question all at once. He took a step closer, heart pounding. "I am sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I should not have let you leave last night." Maya straightened, crossing her arms. "You made it clear, Ethan. You do not believe you deserve this. So why are you here?" He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Because I am afraid, but I am more afraid of losing you than I am of failing again." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling quickly. "You cannot just say that and expect everything to change. You carry secrets, Ethan. You carry ghosts. If I'm going to stay, I need all of you, not just the pieces you think are safe to share." His throat tightened, but he nodded. "You are right. I have been hiding behind my grief because it felt easier than living. But when you walked out last night, I realized I do not want easier. I want real, even if it hurts." Maya's arms dropped slowly to her sides, her expression softening despite herself. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I cannot promise I will never falter, but I can promise I will not run. Not from you, not anymore." The store was nearly empty, only the hum of refrigerators filling the silence. For a long moment, she searched his face, looking for cracks in his resolve. What she found instead was raw sincerity, the kind that could not be faked. Finally, she exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. "You have no idea how much it terrifies me, too," she whispered. "Good," he said with a small wry smile. "Then maybe we can be terrified together." A reluctant laugh escaped her, breaking the heaviness between them. Harvey's bark sounded from outside the glass door, and Maya glanced past Ethan to see the dog wagging his tail impatiently in the drizzle. She shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. "You even brought back up." Ethan allowed the faintest chuckle. He insisted. The laughter faded into a silence that felt different now, charged with the possibility of beginning again. Maya set down the box she had been holding. "All right," she said softly, "but no more walls, no more silence. If I stay, I need the truth, all of it." He nodded solemnly. "Then you will have it." When her shift ended an hour later, Ethan was waiting outside with Harvey. The walk to his car was quiet, but when he opened the passenger door for her, Maya hesitated only a second before sliding in. As they drove back toward the mansion, the drizzle softened into mist, the city fading behind them. Neither spoke much, but the weight of unspoken promises filled the car. When they reached the house, Ethan opened the front door wide, letting the light spill into the hallway. This time, Maya stepped inside, not as a stranger seeking shelter, but as someone choosing to return. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt hope press against the grief, tentative but steady. And for Maya, the fear did not vanish, but she realized fear could coexist with something stronger, something worth staying for. The days that followed unfolded not in grand gestures, but in the quiet weaving of routines that neither Ethan nor Maya had realized they were craving. It began with small things, almost accidental. Maya left her rain jacket hanging on the hook by the door one night, and found it still there the next evening, neatly straightened by Ethan's hand. The following week, she placed her favorite coffee mug beside his on the kitchen shelf, and soon it became the one he reached for each morning when he brewed 2 cups instead of 1. The house shifted around them. Rooms that had been dark for months came alive with light, Maya opened curtains Ethan had kept closed, letting in the muted Seattle sun. She planted small pots of herbs on the wide kitchen sill, laughing when Harvey tried to nuzzle the leaves. Ethan repaired the wobbly leg of the dining table, his hands steady with tools he had not touched in years. He did it without being asked, and when Maya noticed, she smiled in a way that made his chest ache with both pride and longing. Their days acquired a rhythm that felt almost domestic, though neither spoke the word aloud. Maya would arrive after her shifts, her hair damp from the drizzle, and Ethan would be waiting with a towel and tea. They cooked simple meals together, pasta one night, soup another, each attempt imperfect, but made better by laughter. They discovered they both liked late-night radio shows where anonymous callers told strange stories, and they would sit in the living room, listening, trading amused glances when the tales grew absurd. One Saturday afternoon, Maya brought an old photograph of herself at 10 years old perched on the handlebars of her red bike. She set it on the table shyly. "You were right," she said. "I did crash into that hedge." Ethan picked up the photo, carefully studying the child with scraped knees and an indomitable grin. "You look fearless," he murmured. She shook her head. "I was just pretending." He looked up, meeting her eyes. Pretending counts. It means you wanted to be brave, even when you were not. Maya swallowed her throat tight. No one had ever said it like that before. Later that week, Ethan surprised her with a gift her old bike restored. He had found it in her mother's garage when he offered to drive her home one evening, and with quiet determination, he fixed the bent wheel and polished the frame. When he rolled it out onto the porch, Maya gasped, covering her mouth. "You remembered." He nodded, a hint of boyish pride flickering across his features. Thought it deserved a second chance. She rode it down the driveway, Harvey bounding alongside, laughter spilling from her lips. Ethan watched the sound filling spaces in him that had been empty for too long. Nights grew softer. Sometimes they curled on the sofa, watching movies neither cared about Harvey, stretched across their legs. Sometimes Maya read aloud from a book, while Ethan listened, eyes closed, the cadence of her voice anchoring him. Once, during a power outage, they lit candles and played cards at the kitchen table, the flicker of flames painting their faces in gold. Ethan lost every round, but claimed he enjoyed the sound of her triumphant laughter too much to care. Yet for all the warmth both knew, fragility still lingered. Ethan's nightmares returned sudden and brutal, waking him with gasps. One night Maya found him standing by the window, shoulders rigid, eyes haunted. Without a word, she walked to him and placed her hand on his arm. He looked at her as though afraid she would disappear, but she stayed until his breathing steadied. In return, when Maya's debts and exhaustion weighed heavily when she confessed how close she sometimes came to giving up, Ethan did not try to fix it with promises. He simply sat with her listening, reminding her with his presence that she was not alone. Slowly, the mansion became less his and more theirs. Her books gathered on a shelf beside his. Her shoes rested by the door. Her laughter echoed through the halls in ways no design could replicate. The house, once a monument to silence, became a place of shared noise, shared pauses, and shared healing. One evening, as they washed dishes side by side, Ethan handed her a small object, a silver key with a blue tag. "No pressure," he said. "Just thought it would be easier than knocking every time." Maya stared at it, the weight heavy in her palm. "Are you sure?" He met her gaze. I would not have had it made if I was not. She slid it onto her keyring, her chest tight with something she could not name. That night, as she left for her late shift, she turned the key over in her pocket again and again, the cool metal a promise she was still learning to trust. For Ethan, watching her walk down the driveway, with Harvey trotting at her side, the silence that followed did not feel empty anymore. It felt like waiting, the kind of waiting that meant she would return. A year slipped past almost unnoticed, measured not in dates or milestones, but in the quiet accumulation of ordinary days. The mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum of silence. Curtains were open, plants stretched toward pale Seattle sunlight, and laughter often carried through the halls. Maya's shoes sat beside Ethan's at the door, her books leaned against his on the shelf, and Harvey treated them both as if he had always belonged to two people instead of one. The change was not sudden, but gradual, like rain softening hard earth, until life could take root again. On an evening in late spring, the storm returned with a vengeance. The rain hammered against the windows, the wind pressed against the walls, and the sound filled the house with a force that might once have felt suffocating. Now it was only backdrop. Maya sat curled on the couch in a thick sweater, a blanket draped across her legs. Harvey snoring softly at her feet. Ethan came from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea, setting one gently in front of her before taking the seat beside her. She looked at him with a small smile. "You even remembered the cinnamon," she said. "Of course," he replied, as if forgetting was impossible. For a moment they drank in silence, listening to the storm. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low, contemplative. "Funny, the rain used to mean loneliness. Now it only reminds me of you." Maya's heart tightened, the words simple, but carrying the weight of the year they had shared. She reached for his hand under the blanket, their fingers intertwining easily, as though they had been made for that fit. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the haunted man she had first met, but the man who had chosen day after day to keep going. He met her gaze and squeezed her hand gently. "You stayed," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, we stayed." The storm rattled the windows again, lightning cutting across the sky. But inside the room glowed warm with firelight and presence. They had no labels for what they were, no dramatic declarations. But the truth lived in the rhythm they had built in the 1,000 small decisions to remain. Ethan rose and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back to watch the rain. Maya joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. The street outside shimmered under the glow of the porch light, raindrops dancing in golden arcs. She remembered the first time she had stood here dripping, uncertain, about to turn away. And then his voice had stopped her. "Stay, I will keep you warm." She whispered it aloud, her breath fogging the glass. He turned to her, eyebrows lifting slightly. "What?" "The words you said that night," she answered softly. "You told me to stay, and I did." His lips curved into a smile, genuine and steady. "Best thing I ever said." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. For a long while they stood like that, the storm outside fierce, but the air between them calm. Later, after dinner, they settled back onto the couch, Harvey wedged happily between them. The power flickered once, then held, and the fire crackled with steady warmth. Ethan looked at her, his voice almost a whisper. "I used to think love had to be fireworks. Now I think it is this." Maya tilted her head. This, he nodded. Two people choosing each other, even when it rains. Especially when it rains. She smiled, pressing her forehead against his. Then let it rain. Hours later, when the storm finally eased into a soft drizzle, the house remained filled with warmth, not from fire or lamps, but from presence. The rain no longer symbolized isolation. It had become a marker of beginning, a reminder that sometimes the storms that break you open are the same ones that carry you to the place where you are meant to stay. As Maya drifted to sleep on the couch, Ethan watched her with quiet awe. The rhythm of her breathing steady the weight of her hand, still laced with his. He thought of the man he had been when she first appeared at his door, hollow-haunted, resigned to silence, and he thought of the man he was now, imperfect, still scarred but alive, choosing grateful. Outside, the rain whispered across the city, but inside the mansion, two souls who had once been strangers rested in the certainty of shared warmth. And somewhere deep within Ethan, the old wound of guilt eased, not erased, but softened by the knowledge that healing did not mean forgetting. It meant finding someone willing to sit through the storms with you. Someone who, when the world raged, stayed.